The morning of September 14th arrived like any other in the Whitmore estate. Cold marble floors catching the early light, fresh flowers arranged by invisible hands, and the faint scent of lemon polish drifting through the grand corridors. But this was no ordinary morning. Today was Ethan Whitmore's 33rd birthday, and he was being told he could not come home. The message had arrived at 6:42 a.m., delivered not by a phone call, not by a face-to-face conversation, but by a terse email from his estate manager, Douglas Crane. The subject line read, "Estate closed, private event." The body of the email explained, in bullet points both precise and heartless, that the Whitmore family had arranged an exclusive surprise party for Ethan's birthday, beginning at noon and running through the evening. His mother, Vivian Whitmore, a woman who treated social arrangements like military operations, had coordinated with the household staff to ensure the estate was sealed until then. No entry before 12 o'clock. Not even for the man whose name was on the deed. Ethan had stared at the screen of his phone for a long moment, sitting in the back of his chauffeured Mercedes, already dressed in the quiet, understated way he preferred. Dark trousers, a soft gray shirt, no tie. He had been on his way home from an early board meeting in downtown Chicago, hoping to spend the first hours of his birthday in the only place that ever truly felt like peace to him, the East Garden, with his coffee and maybe a book. He had not asked for a party. He had never asked for a party. He typed back a single sentence to Douglas. "I'm coming home." And Douglas, in the most diplomatically spineless reply Ethan had ever received, responded with, "Mrs. Whitmore has asked me to respectfully redirect you, sir. The staff has their orders." Their orders. As if his own home were a fortress under someone else's command. Ethan rolled down the window of the Mercedes and let the sharp September air hit his face. Chicago in autumn had a particular kind of beauty. The trees along Lakeshore Drive were just beginning to turn, gold and amber burning at the edges of leaves still fighting to stay green. He watched them blur past and tried to remember the last time his birthday had felt like something other than a performance. He couldn't. What people misunderstood about Ethan Whitmore, what the Forbes profiles and the gossip columns never got quite right, was that beneath the empire, beneath the polished exterior of a man who had turned a struggling logistics company into a $12 billion global enterprise before the age of 32, was someone profoundly, quietly lonely. Not lonely in the dramatic sense. Not lonely in a way that invited sympathy. Just untethered. Like a kite that had snapped its string and now drifted very high and very alone. He had grown up in that estate, the vast Victorian mansion his grandfather had built in Evanston, on the north shore of Lake Michigan, and he loved it the way a person loves a place that has also broken them. It was the house where his father had worked 18-hour days and died of a heart attack at 57. It was the house where his mother had filled every room with beautiful, cold, important people who never once asked how he was doing. It was the house where he had learned that success was armor, and armor had no heartbeat. And yet, something had changed in that house in the past 8 months. Something small and unlikely, and entirely unplanned. The driver, Marcus, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Mr. Whitmore?" Ethan folded his phone into his breast pocket. "Drive around," he said. "I'll let you know." He looked out the window at the turning leaves and thought, not for the first time, about a little girl with paint on her nose and no fear of him whatsoever. He thought about the sound of her laughter bouncing off the marble floors. He thought about her mother, reserved and careful and quietly fierce, and the way she never flinched around him, never performed, never tried to be anything other than exactly who she was. He thought about how, in a house full of people, those two were the only ones who had ever made it feel like home. Sophia Reyes had arrived at the Whitmore estate 8 months ago with 2 suitcases, a 3-year-old on her hip, and the kind of quiet dignity that doesn't announce itself. She had applied for the live-in housekeeper position through a staffing agency, listed her references, all of them impeccable, and shown up to her interview with her daughter, Lily, tucked beside her because the daycare had been closed and she had no one else. Douglas Crane, the estate manager, had frowned at the child. Sophia had looked him in the eye and said, in a voice like still water, "I work harder than anyone you've hired before. She won't be a problem." Something in her certainty had made Douglas step aside. She was 28 years old, and she had already lived what felt like several lifetimes. She had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, the daughter of a school librarian and a mechanic who had both passed away within a year of each other when Sophia was 24. She had put herself through 2 years of hotel management school, met and married a man who turned out to be better at making promises than keeping them, and found herself at 26, alone, pregnant, and starting over with a kind of methodical calmness that scared the people who witnessed it. She was not a woman who wept in public. She was not a woman who asked for help unless she had already exhausted every other option. She was the kind of woman who got up at 5 in the morning, nursed her grief in the dark kitchen over a cup of tea, and then went about the business of being alive with the dedication of someone who understood that her daughter was watching. Lily was 3 years old and already, unmistakably, her mother's daughter. She had Sophia's dark eyes, enormous and serious and occasionally lit by a mischief that arrived without warning, and her father's absence had, so far, not left a visible mark. Children are resilient in the specific way that breaks your heart. They adapt so quickly that you almost forget they had anything to adapt from. The estate had a small suite on the ground floor, adjacent to the kitchen, with a private entrance and a little patio that looked out onto a side garden. It was comfortable, warm, and private. Sophia had made it a home within 48 hours. Lily's drawings taped carefully to the walls, a small bookshelf assembled from a flat-pack box, a nightlight in the shape of a crescent moon that cast a pale glow over the child's sleeping face. Sophia's job was the house, and she did it the way she did everything, with exacting care and zero drama. The floors gleamed. The linens were pressed to a standard that made the previous housekeeper's work look slovenly. She managed the rotating cleaning staff with quiet authority, coordinated with the kitchen team for household meals, and maintained a running log of maintenance needs that Douglas, who had initially doubted her, began to treat as something close to scripture. She had been in the estate for 3 weeks before she met Ethan Whitmore properly. She had, of course, seen him before, glimpsed him in the corridor, heard his voice on the phone as he walked through the East Wing. He was taller than she'd expected and quieter. The house staff had warned her, in whispers passed like contraband over morning coffee, that he was demanding, private, not unkind but not particularly warm either. "He doesn't really see us," one of the older kitchen staff, a woman named Gloria, had said, not with resentment, but with the resignation of someone stating a fact of nature. "We're part of the furniture to him." Sophia had filed that away without forming an opinion. The proper introduction happened because of Lily. It was a Sunday morning, early, before the rest of the staff had arrived, before the house had fully woken. Sophia had been cleaning the east corridor when Lily, who was supposed to be in their suite eating breakfast, had apparently let herself out through the partially opened door and gone exploring. Sophia had turned around to find her daughter gone, and the particular cold drop of parental terror had sent her moving fast and silent through the corridors, calling Lily's name in a low, urgent voice. She found them in the library. Ethan Whitmore was sitting in the large leather chair by the window, a cup of coffee in one hand, a book open on his knee. And Lily was standing directly in front of him, all of 3 years old, wearing her pajamas with the small yellow stars on them, holding up a picture she had drawn with the crayons she carried everywhere. "That's a dog," Lily was informing him with the absolute authority of a child explaining the obvious to a slow adult. His name is Biscuit. He doesn't live here. I made him up. Ethan Whitmore was staring at her with an expression Sophia had never seen on a person before. Not quite surprise, not quite amusement, not quite tenderness, but some precise combination of all three, as if the child had reached into a locked room inside him and simply walked in, unconcerned with the lock. Sophia arrived at the doorway, breathless and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore." She got out. "I wasn't. I'll take her right now, I'm sorry." He looked up at her, then back at Lily, then at the drawing. "Biscuit has 6 legs," he observed. "He's special," Lily said, not at all defensively. Just as a point of information. Something in Ethan Whitmore's face shifted. Not dramatically. Just shifted. Like a window being opened, very slightly, in a room that hadn't had fresh air in a long time. "She's fine," he said to Sophia. And then, quietly, as if the words surprised even him, "She can stay." Sophia stood in the doorway for one more moment, reading the room. Then she nodded and went back to work. That was the beginning. Over the weeks that followed, Lily became, without anyone planning it or permitting it, a fixture in certain corners of Ethan Whitmore's day. It was never formal. There were no arranged meetings, no conscious decision on anyone's part. It was simply that Lily had no concept of restricted zones, and Ethan, for reasons he could not entirely explain, stopped enforcing the restrictions where she was concerned. She would appear in the East Garden on weekend mornings, crouching over a beetle with the focused gravity of a scientist, narrating her findings to no one in particular. He would be there with his coffee and his reading, and she would eventually drift toward him, not asking for attention but presenting information. The beetle was going somewhere very important. The flowers smelled like his house, but different. She had found a feather that might be from an eagle. He would respond, not with condescension, not with the bright, hollow enthusiasm that adults often deployed around small children like a costume they put on and took off. Just directly. Honestly. The beetle probably was going somewhere important. He didn't know where eagles lost their feathers. That was a good question. She liked him because he didn't talk to her like she was small. He liked her, he was beginning to understand, because she didn't talk to him like he was rich. Sophia watched all of this with careful eyes. She was not naive. She had a child to protect, and she was working in a house where she was an employee, where the power dynamics were as clear as the marble floors beneath her feet. She drew her lines thoughtfully. Always professional, always appropriate, never presuming. When Ethan was in a room, she did her work and left. She answered his questions briefly and directly. She did not volunteer personal information, did not linger, did not allow her daughter's easy comfort with a man to make her own guard slip. But there were moments that found the gaps. One evening, late in November, Sophia had stayed past her usual hours to manage a leak that had developed in the upstairs bathroom. The plumber had come and gone, the damage was contained, and she was finally cleaning up at nearly 9 o'clock when she passed the kitchen and smelled something burning. She pushed open the door to find Ethan at the stove, staring with what could only be described as betrayed disbelief at a pan of what had once aspired to be scrambled eggs. "I sent the kitchen staff home," he said, without turning around, as if she had asked. "I told them I'd manage dinner." Sophia looked at the eggs. They had passed through several stages of grief and arrived at something charred and irrevocable. "Do you want me to make you something?" she asked. He looked at her. There was a pride in him that she could see him weighing against the evidence in the pan. The evidence won. "I don't want you to feel obligated," he said. "I'm hungry too," she said simply. "And Lily hasn't eaten." She made pasta, simple, fast, with garlic and olive oil and whatever herbs she could find, and set 3 plates at the kitchen island because it was the most logical thing to do. Ethan sat on one of the stools, and when Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and holding Biscuit, the stuffed dog she had apparently created to honor the imaginary one, Sophia lifted her up to the stool beside him. They ate in a quiet that was not uncomfortable. Lily, who approached meal times with the same investigative thoroughness she brought to Beetle's, pointed at Ethan's plate. "You have more noodles than me." "That's because I'm bigger," he said. She considered this. "When I'm bigger, I'll have more noodles." "That's correct." She nodded, satisfied by the logic, and went back to eating. Ethan looked at Sophia across the island, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, not exactly, but human. The look of 2 people who had found, unexpectedly, that the same ordinary moment felt like a small miracle. Sophia looked away first. She always looked away first. But as December turned to January and January to February, and the chemistry of the house shifted in those quiet, unannounced increments that change everything before you've noticed anything is changing, she began to understand that looking away was costing her something. One afternoon, she came into the East Garden to retrieve Lily and found her daughter sitting on the stone bench beside Ethan, leaning against his arm with the boneless trust of a child who has decided, without consultation, that someone is safe. Ethan was reading aloud from a book, a picture book, one of Lily's, which he was holding with both hands and doing voices for, in a low, quiet way that he would have been mortified for anyone who knew him professionally to witness. Sophia stopped at the garden entrance and didn't speak. Lily looked up and saw her mother and said, very matter-of-factly, "Ethan is reading me the one about the bear." "I can see that," Sophia said. Ethan looked up. He did not seem embarrassed. He seemed, she searched for the right word, caught. But not in the way of someone doing something wrong. In the way of someone caught being real. "She asked me to," he said. "She's very persuasive," Sophia agreed. He looked at her daughter. This small person who had arrived in his life without invitation and redecorated it without permission, and something in his expression was terrifyingly open. "She is," he said softly. Sophia went home to their little suite that evening and sat on the edge of her bed and was very still for a long time. She was 28 years old, and she had survived things that would have dismantled other people. She knew the difference between what was real and what was dangerous, and she also knew, with the honesty she applied to everything, that sometimes a thing could be both. Section 4. The birthday he didn't want. By the time September came around again, Ethan Whitmore was a different man in the same clothes. He did not announce this. He did not have the vocabulary for it, or perhaps more accurately, he had spent so many years not needing that vocabulary that finding it now felt like reaching for a tool in a drawer he had forgotten existed. But the evidence was there, in the small ways a man's life rearranges itself around something new. He came home earlier. He ate dinner in the kitchen more often than not. He had learned the name of Lily's imaginary dog, and the name of her favorite book, and the names of every character in it, and found that he did not mind knowing these things at all. He had also, slowly and carefully, and with the particular caution of someone who had watched enough people perform feelings to be deeply suspicious of his own, begun to understand what Sophia Reyes was to him. She was not what he'd expected. She was not soft-edged or easy. She was kind but not yielding, warm but not without limits. She held her ground with a gentleness that was somehow more formidable than aggression. When she disagreed with something, a decision he made about the house, a way he'd said something that landed wrong, she said so directly and without drama and then moved on. She did not carry grudges. She did not flirt or maneuver. She simply was herself, entirely, without apology. He had told her things he hadn't told anyone. Not in dramatic confessions. He wasn't built for those, but in the margins of ordinary evenings. About his father. About the particular texture of growing up wealthy and watched and never quite known. About the way success had somehow multiplied his loneliness rather than diminishing it, like a mirror that showed you everything you had but not who you were. She had listened without performing sympathy. She had said, once quietly, "I think you learned very early that being known was dangerous. So you got good at being impressive instead." And the accuracy of it had hit him like cold water, not cruel, just precise, the way only a truthful thing can be. He had not told her how he felt. He had not permitted himself to. She worked for him. She had a daughter to protect. The power imbalance was real, and he was honest enough to know that crossing that line carelessly could damage her in ways that his money would make worse, not better. He had sat with his feelings the way you sit with something that cannot yet be touched, and he had tried, for once in his life, to be patient with something he could not control. And then his birthday arrived, and his mother had locked him out of his own house. He sat in the back of the Mercedes for 3 hours, which was both undignified and oddly clarifying. Marcus drove him along the lake, back and forth, twice through the neighborhoods he'd grown up in, once past the building where he'd signed the lease on his first apartment at 22, back when his grandfather's money was still his goal rather than his reality. The city existed in that beautiful early autumn suspension where it wasn't quite summer anymore and wasn't quite fall. The lake hammered silver in the afternoon light, the trees on the edge of something. He thought about his father's birthday parties, the enormous affairs his mother had constructed out of them, invitations to 200 people, centerpieces and caterers, and a guest list that was essentially a ledger of social obligations. He thought about his father sitting at the head of the table looking already tired, already somewhere else. He did not want to be his father. He realized, with a clarity that felt almost violent, that he had been on a very efficient track toward becoming him. He picked up his phone and called the estate's direct kitchen line. Not Douglas, not his mother's assistant, but the kitchen line, because he knew Sophia would be in the kitchen at this hour, preparing dinner for the staff, and she was the only person in that house who would tell him the truth. She picked up on the second ring. Whitmore Kitchen. "It's me," he said. A pause. Just long enough for him to imagine her expression, that contained, reading the room pause of hers. "I know," she said. "I recognize the number. How bad is it?" Another pause. He could hear, faintly, the sound of something on the stove, something being stirred. "It's quite large," she said carefully. "There are ice sculptures." He closed his eyes. "Sophia." "Yes. I don't want to go in there." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where are you?" "Parking lot of the marina." "Have you eaten?" He almost laughed. Of all the things to ask. "No." "Lily made you a birthday card," she said, and her voice was different on that sentence. Softer, less careful. "She's been working on it for a week. It's mostly glitter and it says Happy Birthday, which she thinks is correct spelling. She was planning to give it to you tonight." A breath. "She's very excited." He didn't say anything for a long moment. "She made me a card," he repeated. "She considers you important," Sophia said, and there was something underneath those words that was not about Lily, and they both knew it. He pressed the phone against his ear and listened to the sound of the kitchen, the warm, ordinary sound of something being prepared, something that smelled of garlic and herbs in his imagination, the sound of a home operating quietly without performance. "I'm coming home," he said. "I know," she said. "Come to the side entrance. I'll leave it open." He ended the call and looked at Marcus in the mirror. "The estate," he said. Marcus, who had been his driver for 6 years and had the professional discretion of a cathedral, said simply, "Of course, sir," and turned the car around. What Lily knew that the adults didn't. He slipped in through the side entrance, just as Sophia had promised. The heavy oak door left unlatched, the corridor beyond it quiet and warm. The sounds of the party drifted from the east wing. The murmur of 200 guests, the clink of glasses, a string quartet performing something that his mother would have described as tasteful. But here, in the kitchen corridor, there was only the smell of garlic bread and the sound of a child's voice singing something in a language that was mostly invented. Sophia met him in the corridor. She had changed from her work clothes into something simple, a soft navy dress, her dark hair down, and she looked so different from the careful, professional version of herself that he stopped for a second, recalibrating. "You didn't have to," he started. "It's your birthday," she said. "You shouldn't eat alone." She tilted her head toward the kitchen. "I made dinner. Nothing fancy." Lily insisted on the birthday candle. He followed her into the kitchen, and there was Lily. She was sitting at the kitchen island in her pajamas, the ones with the yellow stars, wearing a paper crown that she had clearly made herself, colored in with considerable enthusiasm and absolutely no concern for staying inside the lines. In front of her was a plate of pasta, a glass of milk, and a cake. Not an ice sculpture, not a 5-tier professionally decorated affair, but a simple chocolate cake with uneven frosting that was clearly homemade, with one candle stuck slightly off-center in the top. On the counter beside it was a card. It was construction paper, intensely decorated with stickers and crayon, and approximately 7 pounds of loose glitter, and in large, uneven letters it read, "Happy birthday, Ethan. I love you, Lily." A drawing occupied most of the front. A man, a woman, a small girl, and an animal that was either a dog or a bear. All of them holding hands, all of them with large, crayon-red smiles. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the card. He had received, over the course of his life, birthday gifts that cost more than most people earned in a year. He had received cards that were masterpieces of expensive design, presents that required their own insurance. He had stood in rooms full of people singing to him and felt nothing but the weight of the expectation that he should feel something. He picked up Lily's card. He looked at the drawing. The 4 figures with their red smiles and their held hands, the animal that was confidently present even if taxonomically ambiguous. "Is that Biscuit?" he asked, his voice a little rough. Lily looked up from her pasta. She was wearing the paper crown with the gravity of someone who has earned a distinction. "Yes," she said. "He lives with us now." "In the picture." He looked at her. She looked back at him with those dark eyes, Sophia's eyes, open and uncomplicated, and filled with the particular certainty of a child who had decided something was true and saw no reason to doubt it. "Happy birthday," she said. "Birthday," he repeated. "That's what I said." He sat down at the island. Sophia set a plate in front of him, pasta, warm bread, a glass of something, and sat across from him, and for a moment the 3 of them were just there, in the warm kitchen with the sounds of the party somewhere far away and the candle burning crookedly on the little chocolate cake. "She picked the flavor," Sophia said, nodding at the cake. Chocolate was non-negotiable. "I like chocolate too," Ethan said. Lily nodded, satisfied. "I know. I remember." He looked at her. This extraordinary small person who had walked into his library in star pajamas with a drawing of a 6-legged dog and simply decided to claim him, and he felt something happen in his chest that he had no previous experience with and no adequate language for. It was not just warmth. It was something more structural, like a wall he hadn't known was there coming down. He reached over and straightened Lily's paper crown, which had tilted significantly to the left. She let him, and then went back to her pasta. He looked at Sophia. She was watching him with an expression that was tired of being careful. He could see the cost of the carefulness, the effort of maintaining the distance that was appropriate and professional and wise. He could see, beneath it, what she was keeping there. Sophia, he said. She looked at him, not away. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need to say it tonight because I've been not saying it for 8 months, and I think I've used up all the reasons I was using to justify not saying it. She was very still. I know the situation, he said. I know the complications. I know you work here, and I know what that means, and I'm not trying to put you in a difficult position. He stopped. Started again. I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. Not convenient, not situational.
Real.
And I would like, if you'll let me, to figure out what that means for both of us in a way that puts both of you first. Lily, who had been monitoring this conversation from behind her milk glass with the alert eyes of a child who understands more than anyone thinks, set her glass down. You should hug her, she informed Ethan. Both adults looked at her. That's what you do, she said, with the calm authority of someone quoting established protocol. When you like someone. Sophia's face did something complicated. Then, quietly, she laughed, and the laugh was real, unguarded, the first laugh Ethan had heard from her that wasn't edited by professionalism. It was the best thing he had heard in years.
She's not wrong, Sophia said.
He got up from his stool. She watched him come around the island. He stopped in front of her, and she stood up, and for a moment they were just close. Close enough that he could see the particular dark gold in her eyes that he had been trying not to look at directly for months. And then he put his arms around her, carefully, as if she were something he didn't want to damage, and she rested her head against his chest. Lily watched this with a small, deeply satisfied nod. Now blow out the candle, she instructed, before it falls over. He reached back, without letting go of Sophia, and blew it out. The home that finally remembered what it was for. The party in the East Wing wound down around midnight. 200 guests drifted out through the estate's grand front entrance, declaring it a wonderful evening, an absolute triumph of hospitality, everything you'd expect from the Whitmore family. Vivian Whitmore, in her element, received the compliments with the gracious efficiency of someone collecting what was owed. She did not know, until much later, that her son had spent his birthday in the kitchen. She would not have understood it if she had. That was all right. Understanding was not. Ethan was beginning to learn the only currency that mattered. In the weeks that followed his birthday, things changed. Not suddenly, not with announcements or grand gestures. Change, real change, tended to be quieter than people expected. But they changed, solidly, and in a direction he could feel beneath his feet like firmer ground. He spoke to Sophia honestly, and she spoke to him. They took their time, she insisted on it, and he was grateful for the insistence because it was the right instinct. There were conversations that were not easy, that required the kind of honesty which strips the comfortable varnish off things and lets you see what's actually there. He told her about the version of himself he was afraid he'd become. She told him about the version of trusting someone that still terrified her, and why. They sat with those things in the space between them and let them be real rather than rushing to resolve them. He restructured her employment through the estate's management office, not to obscure the relationship, but to properly separate and formalize it, with the guidance of an employment attorney, so that her position and financial security were entirely independent of whatever they were to each other. It was the one thing he felt most firmly about. I need you to be able to leave, he told her. If you ever want to. I need you to know that. She had looked at him for a long time and then said, That's either the most generous thing anyone has ever said to me or the strangest. He said, Can it be both? She said it could. Lily navigated these changes with the imperious confidence of someone who had planned this all along and was pleased that the adults had caught up. She had already, within her own interior world, settled the matter months before anyone else had. Ethan was Ethan. He lived in the house. He read books aloud and didn't talk to her like she was small and knew how to straighten a crooked paper crown. These were the qualifications she required. Everything else was paperwork. He did not replace what she had no memory of having. He was careful about that, careful not to rush toward a word or a role that needed time to earn itself. But he was there, consistently and without performance, in the ordinary ways that children need people to be there, present at dinner, available on Saturday mornings, interested in beetles and imaginary dogs and the complicated interior logic of 3-year-old understanding. He learned to read the particular note in Lily's voice that meant she was tired before she knew she was tired. He learned that she needed exactly one warning before a transition and exactly 0 negotiations after it. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated the sound of the garbage truck and believed with absolute conviction that the moon followed only their car. Sophia watched him learn her daughter and felt something in her that had been braced for a very long time begin, very slowly, to rest. That first winter, Ethan made a decision about the east wing of the estate, a decision that surprised Douglas Crane and baffled his mother and made complete sense to exactly 3 people in the house. He had the largest of the formal parlors converted. Not into anything grand, just into a room. A proper living room, with a sofa you could actually lie on and a bookshelf at child height and warm lighting and a rug that Lily chose from a catalog by pointing at it without hesitation and saying, "That one," in the tone of someone who had already decided. There was a reading corner and a low table for art projects and a window seat that looked out over the east garden. Vivian Whitmore came to look at it when it was done and stood in the doorway with an expression that mixed confusion with something she would not have named as grief but probably was, the recognition that a house she had styled for decades according to one vision was now, quietly, becoming the home of a different one. "Why?" she asked. "Because people should have a place to exist," Ethan said. "That isn't about impressing anyone." She looked at him for a moment. He was 33 years old, and he looked, she thought, different. Not younger, not softer exactly, but less armored, less exhausted, like someone who had set something heavy down and found he could stand differently without it. She said nothing more about the room. On a Saturday in January, the 3 of them were in the East Garden, Lily examining the frozen ground with a stick, Ethan and Sophia sitting on the stone bench with coffee, their shoulders touching in the easy way of people who have earned proximity, and Lily looked up from her excavation and said, apropos of nothing, "I want Biscuit to be real." "He is real," Ethan said. "He lives in the picture."
No.
She stood up, very certain. "I mean a real one."
A dog.
"With 4 legs." A pause. "Probably." Ethan looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Ethan. 4 legs is standard, he confirmed. "We'll see," Sophia said, which in parent language means yes but not today, and which Lily received with the patience of someone who has learned to identify a yes in any container. Later, when Lily was inside and the garden was quiet, Sophia put her coffee down and said, quietly, "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For not being who I expected you to be."
She paused.
"I expected you to be furniture." He remembered Gloria's words, the kitchen staff member who had told Sophia, in those first weeks, that Ethan didn't really see them. He thought about the man he had been before a 3-year-old in star pajamas had walked into his library with a drawing of a 6-legged dog and decided, without consultation, that he was safe. "I expected me to be furniture too," he said. Sophia smiled. That real smile, the unedited one. Then she leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and they watched the frost-hard garden in the January light and said nothing else, because nothing else was needed. The estate that had begun the year as a fortress, locked and staged and arranged for the performance of other people's expectations, had become, room by room and morning by morning and one ordinary Tuesday evening at a time, something else. Something smaller and warmer and true. A home remembered, at last, what it was for. And in a suite on the ground floor, a child with paint perpetually somewhere on her face slept beneath a crescent moon nightlight, one arm thrown around a stuffed dog with the improbable name of Biscuit, dreaming whatever extraordinary things a 3-year-old dreams when she is warm and fed and safe and certain, with the certainty of someone who has always known what the adults are only just figuring out, that she is loved.